Becky Meagher, and welcome to Transitions, Body, Mind, Spirit. Transitions, we all go through so many transitions in our life, and I like to use the metaphor of triathlon, something I've been doing for 13, 14 years, I guess. And in a triathlon, you first swim, and then you get to the transition area, and then you get on your bicycle, and then you transition again, and then you run. So our lives are like that. We are trying to do one thing, and then some roadblock happens, and we try a different thing, and then we think it's a disaster, and then, wow, it turned out to be really good. So that's what this program is about. And I have an amazing entrepreneurial woman, Jenn, who is going to talk to us about the transitions in her life. And she currently owns a very successful, very sleek, wonderful magazine for women for fly fishing. And I'm going to show a little bit of this. This is her magazine, and Jenn, welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me.
And tell us about this amazing magazine and how you started it, and tell us about what this is.
Yeah, so it is I like to call it an international fly fishing lifestyle magazine. It is, all of our authors, for the most part, are women, everyday women, so not professional anglers by any means. I wanted it to be a very empowering magazine, and the way that I'm empowered is not by watching someone who's a professional angler actually go out there and catch a fish. That doesn't make me feel like I can do it. But if I hear the story of a young girl whose dad died, and he had always asked her to go out fishing with him, and she never did, and so then he died, and she was going unexpectedly, and she was going through the garage, and going through his stuff in his garage, and found his fly fishing stuff, and then worked through the stages of grief with her dad's fly rod, teaching herself to fish. Well, that's just a story that everybody can relate to, and or maybe a story of a woman who goes to Ecuador and picks up a fly rod for the first time and catches a beautiful brown trout. Well, that makes you think that maybe fly fishing isn't quite as expensive or as hard as people make it sound. And so I think that's what's empowering. So we tell the everyday woman's story.
In this magazine. And this comes out every quarter?
Yep, it's quarterly. So spring, summer, fall, winter.
Okay. And this was birthed from your own head, right? You made it up. And I find it fascinating that you have done so many things that you didn't have experience for. You just did it.
Yeah. I just saw a need and filled it, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a true entrepreneur. So we'll talk more about your magazine, but let's go back from your beginning as a youth. And where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in West Bend, Wisconsin. So if you have a popcorn popper from West Bend, it was made in my hometown.
Wow, wow. And then you kind of were raised with an entrepreneurial spirit because wasn't your dad a contractor, a can-do kind of person?
Oh, yeah. As well, my grandfather owned a company that was, he was an entrepreneur himself, and he was part of Chilton Manufacturing, where you make red gas cans. You'd run out of gas, and you'd get one of those cans, and so that was his company. And then my dad was a contractor, built almost my whole hometown, West Bend, and I guess it's just kind of in my blood.
So you originally had a path of, I guess, you got a chemistry degree, is that right? And
my background is
became a married person.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of early. And you have 4 children.
I do.
Are pretty much adults by now, right?
They are all adults, yes.
Okay. All right. So your story is very interesting in that you also created, even while you were having your family, a business of medical
transcription.
Transcription.
Right.
Tell us, how'd that even happen?
Yeah, so my then husband was a pastor, and so obviously he didn't make any money. And so I wanted to be able to stay home. I had my first daughter a week after our first anniversary. And
that was quick. Yeah.
Yes, and I wanted to be able to stay home, but couldn't afford to. So I was, when I was pregnant, I was working at a hospital in the Chicagoland area. We were living in Chicago. And after she was born, I went back to work 3 days a week for like maybe 3 or 4 months, and I just couldn't stand it. I couldn't stand being away from her. So I one day walked into the doctor's office, and the secretary said, "Hey, Jen, what are you doing? Are you looking for another job?" And I said, "Well, no, but what do you want me to do?" And they were like, "Well, how about like our transcription and our filing?" And I'd always been really good at that kind of stuff. And I said, "Well, could I take that home and do it?" And they handed me all the tapes. It was tapes back in that day before fax machines or anything. And I walked out, and I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm starting a business." And so then that allowed me to be able to stay home and make money. And, you know, cottage industry was not cottage industry. No one worked from home in 1990, right? That was before internet. And so I really just started this business from the ground up in my home, and then employed moms who wanted to be able to stay home with their kids but couldn't afford to.
Whoa, so you found a niche right there that, wow, they were moms just like you, they wanted to stay home, and you built that business up, right?
I did. And then I had that one for 9 years, and then I sold it. And then I had a non-compete clause, but the woman who bought my business lost the business within 3 months. All of her clients left. And so then she closed the doors, which opened up my non-compete, and so basically she paid me to start my second medical transcription company. So yes, I had that one for about 9 years as well.
Wow, and that was, you said, very successful.
It was very successful.
Yeah. And then your transition happened because your marriage, after 20-some years, did not last.
Right.
So then it was like, oh my, now what?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
What do you do? Right. I mean,
Right.
I got married young, and it was probably about 16 years we were together completely. And so at that point, you know, I had 4 kids, and I had a business that, you know, was at that point undergoing some changes. And going through a divorce, I just found fly fishing as a way to relax and be a stress reliever and get me through that difficult period of my life.
Now, I find it, the story of how you even found fly fishing, wasn't it you were going to take a course and what the heck, it's not that expensive and I'll learn to tie flies? Is that right?
Yeah, so I was at this point working at the University of Michigan, and the Huron River runs right through the campus of the University of Michigan, and so it was really, really cold one winter, and there was nothing to do, and so I looked online for something to do and found a fly tying class. And you know, I wasn't an angler. I didn't fish really, even though I lived on a lake. I didn't fish. My brother and sister did. And so I thought, well, you know, it was really cheap. It was like 6 classes for $85, and I thought, well, I'll try it. And from the moment I walked in the fly shop, I just loved everything about it.
You found home.
Yeah.
And you have some flies here, and if our camera people can take a look, can you tell us a little bit about some of these, from the very biggest
Sure.
to the smallest?
Sure. So your bigger flies that are here, we would consider those, like this Clouser minnow, we would consider those streamers.
Okay, now tell me again a little slower.
Sure. So this is a Clouser minnow.
A Clouser minnow. Okay.
A man named Bob Clouser, who is still alive today, actually created that pattern. It's a great bass fly. It imitates a little tiny smallmouth minnow. And so these we would consider streamers. These are going to be something that's going to imitate a minnow pattern, so under the water.
Okay.
And then we have some of these patterns over here with the rubber legs, and those would be very bug-like. You can see they look like bugs.
And you forget that there's a hook, and all these have hooks.
Right. And then like obviously a worm pattern and some little scuds you would find as little bugs under the rocks in the water.
That kind of looks like a little baby shrimp.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. And so these artfully are all made by hand.
Yes.
And this kind of stuff started you in the road of fly fishing. From making these that are mimicking the insects that the fish bite.
Right.
Right. Okay. So here you are, and you are making these things, and then somehow or other you got a reel and started fishing. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so that was in winter, and in Michigan everything is frozen, so the rivers were frozen. And then in the spring, when the ice was off the river, Well, I could see the river from my office, from my desk. I could see the river, and so I would just go down from my desk every day. I would go down to my car, put my waders on, and walk in the river and just taught myself to fish.
Whoa. Just, by God, I'm going to go out there and do this.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. And so somehow or other, it must have really resonated with you. What is it that you like so much about fly fishing?
I think it's, part of it is being out in nature, but I think the biggest thing is there's always something to learn. It's not only a stress reliever, but the art of fly fishing is just from the bugs to the casting to the different types of species that you can catch on a fly, from saltwater to freshwater, rivers to lakes to oceans. There's just always something that you can learn about this sport, and I love the challenge of that.
Wow. So there you are, you're in Ann Arbor, and then somehow or other you got to Tennessee and you created an online magazine which became this gorgeous printed magazine. So tell us, it's a great story about how you decided to come to Tennessee and how you even found this town that you live in.
Yeah, so I moved from Ann Arbor to Chicago.
Okay.
And when I moved to Chicago, there was a little tiny fly shop that was teaching a tying lesson. They were tying flies on a random Wednesday night, I think it was. And so I walked into that shop, which was very close to my house at the time, and there was the guy who was teaching the class had just started a Midwest fly fishing magazine. And he knew that I could write, and so he asked me to write a woman's column for his magazine, which was called A Tight Loop. And so I started writing a woman's column, and I did that for a couple of years. And then I really wanted to write an article for a woman's fly fishing magazine, and I looked around and there wasn't one. So that was June of 2013. And so I thought, well, if I'm missing it, then other people are as well. And so that from June of 13 to September of 2013, we had our first magazine. So just a couple months it took me to get the first magazine out the door. And then it's been, this downward spiral ever since.
Whoa, whoa. So it was like, wow, nobody's done this. I'll do it. In fact, I'll do it in 3 months, which is unheard of. Unheard of. You are a woman of action, a woman of action. So there you are, and then tell us about how you got to Dover, Tennessee.
Yeah. So from Chicago then, a couple of years ago, my oldest daughter and my son-in-law and my grandkids, they were living in Bellevue at the time, and they're in Franklin now. And so I wanted to get out of the Midwest. It was cold up there. There's a lot of snow. The older I get, the less I like the cold. And so I literally opened up a map, and I knew I wanted to be somewhere around where my grandkids were and my 2 of my 4 children. And I saw all this water that was like up by the Tennessee-Kentucky border and called the Land Between the Lakes. And I thought, that looks like a good place to move to. I'd never been there before. And so I looked to see if there was a town there at the base of that, and there was, called Dover. And so I literally picked a house and moved down here.
Had you been to Dover?
No, I'd been there. I'd been in Dover for 20 minutes with my mom to look at the house, and said I'll take it, and drove back to Chicago, and the next day left for Belize, and that was that. Came home, and literally everything was already packed, and got in the truck and moved to Dover. Unpacked everything, went into town to get a bottle of wine, and realized I'd moved to a dry county. I did not know there even was such a thing.
Oh my heavens.
Yeah.
So you couldn't get a bottle of wine in your own town.
Nope.
Whoa. So do you have to go to Kentucky for that?
Yep.
Yes.
I do.
Wow. How about that?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. But, okay, so here you are in Dover, which is not really a huge town.
No.
But you can fish. And didn't you tell me that currently you fish maybe 280 days a year?
Yeah, that's about right.
So you have a passion for fly fishing, you write about it, and you do it.
That's right.
Yes, that's fabulous. Wow. All right, so you sent me a resume of what you've been doing the past couple of years, and there are city after city all over the place that you have spoken and been invited to. And this whole thing has blossomed from a magazine that's online to you being a guest lecturer. And tell us more about how that even happened. You have an incredible amount of cities that you go to.
Yeah. Well, you know, I love this sport, and I think that when you love something, you're very passionate about it. It just shows, and other people want to learn about it. And so I love to get new anglers and female anglers involved in the sport and educate them. You know, that's my big thing. I want to educate the anglers and women in our sport. And so I think it all started from when I did a lot of research on the history of women in fly fishing. That's how it started. People really wanted to hear this story of, well, you know, women are not new to this sport. It might seem like we're new because we're the biggest growing demographic, but we've been in this sport since the 15th century. So I think that, you know, from when I was just speaking at my local Trout Unlimited chapter, word of mouth got around that I was doing this presentation. And you know, from my days being a pastor's wife, I used to speak in front of church all the time. And so, you know, yeah, so I'm comfortable in front of an audience. And it was just another way for me to get the word out about the magazine, get the word out about fly fishing in general, and get more people involved in the sport.
Okay. So you are also fly fishing in other countries, and are you sponsored by anyone, or how does any of that work? Are you part of a
yeah, I don't like sponsored in a way like maybe someone pays for me to go. No, I guess yes and no. So not a company. A company does not sponsor me. Like I'm not on the pro staff with Winston or Orvis or anything like that. I think that through the magazine, I also do hosted trips, and so I have the opportunity to take other people to different places to fish as well, and so that's where my travel comes. Or, you know, like for instance, the cover of that magazine, Calgary, I went there with Visit Calgary, and they sponsored us to come. There were 3 of us, and they sponsored us to come so that we could experience the fishery, write about the fishery, give them a little bit of exposure. So.
Wow. Wow. So there you are, and you are speaking at all these different places, and I don't know how you have time to even put a magazine together. You are all over, and I just saw you last night speaking at the Music City Fly Girls, which I'm a member of, and that is a fly fishing group, and you did a great presentation on the history of fly fishing that women have been involved in, and the theme so often, the husband would be the fly fisher. The little woman goes, yeah, I see him, and then she goes, okay, I think I'll put a fly together, and she catches something, and she doesn't even know what she's doing. That was a theme over and over again. The little woman is kind of like not talked to, but hey, there's a big story there that you are uncovering that people didn't know about.
Right. Yeah. That, you know, a lot of fly fishing is what it is today because of what women in the sport in our history have done. And so I love to speak on that, and especially speak to not just, you know, not just women. I like to educate men about that as well, so that everyone knows that women have a firm foundation, that they belong in the river and they belong in a fly shop.
Right. They belong in a fly shop, and they're not going to be ignored.
Right.
Right. Right. So what about the trips that you have? Can you tell us about things that are coming up, and are they only for women?
They are not only for women. I just did a trip to Argentina. It was part of Orvis's 50-50 by 2020, which is an initiative that Orvis started that is now industry-wide to get 50% women, 50% men on the rivers and in fly fishing by 2020.
Wow.
Right, yeah. So we do trips that are both co-ed and then just women's trips. And I've just recently combined my efforts at Dunn with Heather Hodson, who's from United Women on the Fly. And we created an entity called Ribbon Hoppers Adventures, where we do a cross-country road trip. This year we are going from Nags Head, North Carolina to New Orleans, and we are fishing for redfish along the way, and having 5 women's events where women can come and fish with us and have a great time along our road trip.
What fun.
Yeah.
Has anybody even done that before?
I don't think so. Last year when we did our road trip, it was one of a kind. That was the first time anyone had ever seen women get in a car and drive cross country. We went from Nashville. We started in Nashville, and we went to Craig, Montana, and we had 5 events along the way.
And you were interviewed by Lester Holt on NBC News?
Yep, NBC Nightly News.
Wow.
On the rise of women in fly fishing. They met us out in, NBC Nightly News met us out in Craig, Montana for that segment.
That's fabulous. It seems that your success is mounting and mounting, and your magazine is called Done. Why did you name it Done?
Well, I think that picking a name is the hardest part about starting a business, right? I mean, because you're stuck with the name after you have it. And so I knew that I wanted a one-word title, something that was easy, something that, you know, looked good as a logo, because the bigger your name, the harder it is to logo it, right, and to brand yourself. And so Done is a stage of the Mayfly, and the Mayfly is one of the biggest hatches, we call it a hatch, in the fly fishing. That's what you fish. You fish a hatch, and trout specifically love, and bass love to eat mayflies, and so this is just a stage of the Mayfly, and I like the name because it's like a play on words, right? You can say been there, done that, or get it done, or, you know, that kind of stuff. And so
play on words.
Yep.
Got it. Right. And on the magazine itself, you have a beautiful gold embossed mayfly. I mean, it's very, very slick. It's very beautiful. Is that something every issue has something like that?
Yep, every issue has a foil stamp done on it. The color changes according to what the cover of the magazine looks like.
Okay. Wow. Wow. So if there's a woman out there listening to this program and says, I've never fly fished, how do I even start? What do you tell people?
I tell them 2 things. It's not as expensive, and it's not as hard as you think. Orvis has a really great program. They call it the 101 program. You can go to any Orvis store, and they have free fly fishing lessons where you can learn to, you know, everything from the different components of a rod, a reel, a line, you know, the different flies that you'd use, and then they get you out there and they actually teach you how to cast. So I would say if you want to try it, you could go right to Orvis. It does not cost you a penny. And they even do all women's classes. So if you're a little intimidated, fly fishing can be an intimidating kind of sport, just because people think that women are new to the sport. But so if you are intimidated by thinking that you might want to do it, but maybe it's too hard, or you're embarrassed to try it, you can do an all-women's class. I took an all-women's casting class that was instrumental in getting me to the place where I'm at now.
Wow. So you feel more comfortable with your own female companions, and you're getting out there and learning. And I know here in Middle Tennessee and in Green Hills there is an Orvis store, and also Susan Thrasher is a mutual friend of ours, and she is a professional guide and teacher that you can go to, and that's where I have gone to learn the rudiments of fly fishing. I have a lot to learn, but it's really fun.
Don't we all, though? I mean, that's the best part. You don't have to be good at it to enjoy it.
Right, right. So it sounds like you've done this, and knowing you're the entrepreneur, there are other things in the horizon that may be bubbling under for and additional projects. Can you elaborate a little, give us a little hint of what might be next?
Well, you know, if I had my way, 2019 would see me starting another magazine, which, yes, so there might be a sequel to Done that is not fly fishing related. So that's on the back burner, as well as, you know, we really talked about doing a podcast. I think a podcast would be really important. You know, we have a lot of really talented authors that we've worked with over the last 6 years, and so I'd love for our audience to actually hear from them. I think that's an important part of continuing to empower women and men alike to get involved in the sport.
That would be very good. I think there's definitely an audience out there for you. Wow. And you planning on being in Dover, which I find amazing. You're 2 hours away, and you don't mind at all driving here and driving there. You're a woman of energy, to say the least. Wow.
Well, I try.
Yes, yes. And is there anything you'd like to impart to the audience that people might have misconceptions about what fly fishing is all about? They've seen the movies and a few movies, and I know when I've talked to people, they say, oh, it's so difficult. Oh, I could never learn. What do you say to that?
It's not difficult. I mean, you know, and so you can learn to cast 40 feet of line in about 10 minutes. It's not difficult.
There you go, 10 minutes.
And it's not expensive. You can get a rod or reel and a line at Orvis or from other companies that are out there, Temple Fork Outfitters, for $159. You can be on the water fishing today for $159. And, you know, you can buy a secondhand rod that in a fly rod setup. Now,
secondhand rod.
Yeah, it might not be exactly what you like, but if you don't know that you're really going to like the sport or not, you know, maybe that's a way to start as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like training wheels for fly fishing. You don't
Right.
have to go out and buy the Rolls Royce of gear. You can start out doing it. And I have a friend of mine who inherited from a friend of his who had passed away buckets and buckets of gear and stuff, and he's having a hard time selling it all, you know. So there are people out there that might even give it to you.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, for sure, especially when they find out that you want to get involved in the sport. And the fly fishing community is so encompassing. They love, you know, the fly anglers that I know love to get other people involved. And so I would easily take anyone that wants to go fishing out, and you wouldn't need anything. You just need to show up. And I'm not alone in that. I think that, I mean, the Music City Fly Girls, for example, I think any one of them of the women that attend the Music City Fly Girls would be happy to take someone else out fishing.
Right, to show them the ropes and show them how fun it can be. And we're running out of time, but the Casting for Recovery is something that is a national organization that helps women who have ever had breast cancer and takes them on a weekend to learn to fly fish. And also there's counselors, and I think you've been involved in that too, right?
I have, in a couple of different programs.
Okay, and then we should probably put that on our credits too. And now you have a website, and if people want to subscribe to your wonderful magazine, how do they do that?
They can just go to dunmagazine.com. So D-U-N is how it's spelled, dunmagazine.com.
Okay, and then they can subscribe and start getting the hard copy. And then your circulation, I think you have a mixture of hard copy and also online. The total is how many households is this going to?
Oh, with our online and print, probably well over about 180,000.
180,000. Wow, that's amazing. And that just came from just your brain going, nobody else is doing this. Why don't I? I love that. Wow. Well, Jenn Ripple, thank you for an inspirational story. Thank you. You have to come back. Thank you. Transitions, body, mind, spirit.